Chapter 57. It was worth a kingdom to be at sea again. It was a relief to drop all anxiety whatsoever, all questions as to where we should go, how long we should stay, whether it were worthwhile to go or not, all anxieties about the condition of the horses, all such questions as shall we ever get to water? Shall we ever lunch? Ferguson, how many more million miles have we got to creep under this awful sun before we camp? It was a relief to cast all these torturing little anxieties far away. Ropes of steel they were, and every one with a separate and distinct strain on it, and feel the temporary contentment that is born of the banishment of all care and responsibility. We did not look at the compass. We did not care now where the ship went to, so that she went out of sight of land as quickly as possible. When I travel again, I wish to go in a pleasure ship. No amount of money could have purchased for us, in a strange vessel and among unfamiliar faces, the perfect satisfaction and the sense of being at home again which we experienced when we stepped on board the Quaker City, our own ship after this wearisome pilgrimage. It is a something we have felt always when we returned to her, and a something we had no desire to sell. We took off our blue woolen shirts, our spurs, and heavy boots, our sanguinary revolvers and our buckskin-seated pantaloons, and got shaved and came out in Christian costume once more. All but Jack, who changed all other articles of his dress, but clung to his traveling pantaloons. They still preserved their ample buckskin seat intact, and so his short pea jacket and his long, thin legs assisted to make him a picturesque object whenever he stood on the forecastle looking abroad upon the ocean over the bows. At such times, his father's last injunction suggested itself to me. He said, "Jack, my boy, you are about to go among a brilliant company of gentlemen and ladies who are refined and cultivated and thoroughly accomplished in the manners and customs of good society. Listen to their conversation, study their habits of life, and learn. Be polite and obliging to all, and considerate towards everyone's opinions, failings, and prejudices. Command the just respect of all your fellow voyagers, even though you fail to win their friendly regard. And Jack, don't you ever dare, while you live, appear in public on those decks in fair weather, in a costume unbecoming your mother's drawing room. It would have been worth any price if the father of this hopeful youth could have stepped on board some time, and seen him standing high on the forecastle, pea jacket, tasseled red fez, buckskin patch and all, placidly contemplating the ocean, a rare spectacle for anybody's drawing room. After a pleasant voyage and a good rest, we drew near to Egypt, and out of the mellowest of sunsets, we saw the domes and minarets of Alexandria rise into view. As soon as the anchor was down, Jack and I got a boat and went ashore. It was night by this time, and the other passengers were content to remain at home and visit ancient Egypt after breakfast. It was the way they did at Constantinople. They took a lively interest in new countries, but their schoolboy impatience had worn off, and they had learned that it was wisdom to take things easy and go along comfortably. These old countries do not go away in the night. They stay till after breakfast. When we reached the pier, we found an army of Egyptian boys with donkeys no larger than themselves. Waiting for passengers, for donkeys are the omnibuses of Egypt. We preferred to walk, but we could not have our own way. The boys crowded about us, clamored around us, and slewed their donkeys exactly across our path, no matter which way we turned. They were good-natured rascals, and so were the donkeys. We mounted, and the boys ran behind us and kept the donkeys in a furious gallop, as is the fashion at Damascus. I believe I would rather ride a donkey than any beast in the world. He goes briskly, he puts on no airs, he is docile, though opinionated. Satan himself could not scare him, and he is convenient, very convenient. When you are tired riding, you can rest your feet on the ground and let him gallop from under you. We found the hotel and secured rooms, and were happy to know that the Prince of Wales had stopped there once. They had it everywhere on signs. No other princes had stopped there since, till Jack and I came. We went abroad through the town then, and found it a city of huge commercial buildings, and broad, handsome streets brilliant with gaslight. By night, it was a sort of reminiscence of Paris. But finally Jack found an ice cream saloon, and that closed investigations for that evening. The weather was very hot. It had been many a day since Jack had seen ice cream, and so it was useless to talk of leaving the saloon till it shut up. In the morning, the lost tribes of America came ashore and infested the hotels, and took possession of all the donkeys and other open barouches that offered. They went in picturesque procession to the American consuls, to the great gardens, to Cleopatra's Needles, to Pompey's Pillar, to the palace of the Viceroy of Egypt, to the Nile, to the superb groves of date palms. One of our most inveterate relic hunters had his hammer with him and tried to break a fragment off the upright needle and could not do it. He tried the prostrate one and failed. He borrowed a heavy sledge-hammer from a mason and tried again. He tried Pompey's Pillar, and this baffled him. Scattered all about the mighty monolith were sphinxes of noble countenance, carved out of Egyptian granite as hard as blue steel, and whose shapely features the wear of 5,000 years had failed to mark or mar. The relic hunter battered at these persistently and sweated profusely over his work. He might as well have attempted to deface the moon. They regarded him serenely with the stately smile they had worn so long, and which seemed to say, "Peck away, poor insect. We were not made to fear such as you. In 10 dragging ages, we have seen more of your kind than there are sands at your feet. Have they left a blemish upon us?" But I am forgetting the Jaffa colonists. At Jaffa we had taken on board some 40 members of a very celebrated community. They were male and female, babies, young boys and young girls, young married people, and some who had passed a shade beyond the prime of life. I refer to the Adams Jaffa colony. Others had deserted before. We left in Jaffa Mr. Adams, his wife, and 15 unfortunates who not only had no money, but did not know where to turn or whither to go. Such was the statement made to us. Our 40 were miserable enough in the first place, and they lay about the deck seasick all the voyage, which about completed their misery, I take it. However, 1 or 2 young men remained upright, and by constant persecution we wormed out of them some little information. They gave it reluctantly and in a very fragmentary condition, for, having been shamefully humbugged by their prophet, they felt humiliated and unhappy. In such circumstances, people do not like to talk. The colony was a complete fiasco. I have already said that such as could get away did so, from time to time. The prophet Adams once an actor, then several other things, afterward a Mormon and a missionary, always an adventurer remains at Jaffa with his handful of sorrowful subjects. The 40 we brought away with us were chiefly destitute, though not all of them. They wished to get to Egypt. What might become of them, then they did not know, and probably did not care anything to get away from hated Jaffa. They had little to hope for. Because after many appeals to the sympathies of New England, made by strangers of Boston, through the newspapers, and after the establishment of an office there for the reception of moneyed contributions for the Jaffa colonists, $1 was subscribed. The Consul General for Egypt showed me the newspaper paragraph, which mentioned the circumstance, and mentioned also the discontinuance of the effort and the closing of the office. It was evident that practical New England was not sorry to be rid of such visionaries, and was not in the least inclined to hire anybody to bring them back to her. Still, to get to Egypt was something, in the eyes of the unfortunate colonists, hopeless as the prospect seemed of ever getting further. Thus circumstanced, they landed at Alexandria from our ship. One of our passengers, Mr. Moses S. Beach of the New York Sun, inquired of the Consul General what it would cost to send these people to their home in Maine by the way of Liverpool, and he said $1,500 in gold would do it. Mr. Beach gave his check for the money, and so the troubles of the Jaffa colonists were at an end. It was an unselfish act of benevolence. It was done without any ostentation, and has never been mentioned in any newspaper, I think. Therefore, it is refreshing to learn now, several months after the above narrative was written, that another man received all the credit of this rescue of the colonists. Such is life. Alexandria was too much like a European city to be novel, and we soon tired of it. We took the cars and came up here to ancient Cairo, which is an oriental city and of the completest pattern. There is little about it to disabuse one's mind of the error, if he should take it into his head, that he was in the heart of Arabia. Stately camels and dromedaries, swarthy Egyptians, and likewise Turks and black Ethiopians, turbaned, sashed, and blazing in a rich variety of oriental costumes of all shades of flashy colors, are what one sees on every hand crowding the narrow streets and the honeycombed bazaars. We are stopping at Shepherd's Hotel, which is the worst on earth except the one I stopped at once in a small town in the United States. It is pleasant to read this sketch in my notebook now and know that I can stand Shepherd's Hotel, sure, because I have been in one just like it in America and survived. I stopped at the Benton House. It used to be a good hotel, but that proves nothing. I used to be a good boy, for that matter. Both of us have lost character of late years. The Benton is not a good hotel. The Benton lacks a very great deal of being a good hotel. Perdition is full of better hotels than the Benton. It was late at night when I got there, and I told the clerk I would like plenty of lights, because I wanted to read an hour or two. When I reached No. 15 with the porter, we came along a dim hall that was clad in ancient carpeting, faded, worn out in many places, and patched with old scraps of oilcloth, a hall that sank under one's feet and creaked dismally to every footstep. He struck a light 2 inches of sallow, sorrowful, consumptive tallow candle that burned blue and sputtered and got discouraged and went out. The porter lit it again, and I asked if that was all the light the clerk sent. He said, "Oh no, I've got another one here," and he produced another couple of inches of tallow candle. I said, "Light them both, I'll have to have one to see the other by." He did it, but the result was drearier than darkness itself. He was a cheery, accommodating rascal. He said he would go somewheres and steal a lamp. I abetted and encouraged him in his criminal design. I heard the landlord get after him in the hall 10 minutes afterward. "Where are you going with that lamp?" 15 wants it, sir." 15. Why, he's got a double lot of candles. Does the man want to illuminate the house? Does he want to get up a torchlight procession? What is he up to, anyhow? He don't like them candles, says he wants a lamp. Why, what in the nation does? Why, I never heard of such a thing. What on earth can he want with that lamp? Well, he only wants to read, that's what he says. Wants to read, does he? Ain't satisfied with 1,000 candles, but has to have a lamp. I do wonder what the devil that fellow wants that lamp for. Take him another candle, and then if. But he wants the lamp, says he'll burn the DD old house down if he don't get a lamp. A remark which I never made. I'd like to see him at it once. Well, you take it along, but swear it beats my time, though, and see if you can't find out what in the very nation he wants with that lamp. And he went off growling to himself, and still wondering and wondering over the unaccountable conduct of No. 15. The lamp was a good one, but it revealed some disagreeable things. A bed in the suburbs of a desert of room, a bed that had hills and valleys in it, and you'd have to accommodate your body to the impression left in it by the man that slept there last, before you could lie comfortably. A carpet that had seen better days, a melancholy washstand in a remote corner, and a dejected pitcher on it sorrowing over a broken nose. A looking-glass split across the center, which chopped your head off at the chin and made you look like some dreadful unfinished monster or other, the paper peeling in shreds from the walls. I sighed and said, "This is charming, and now don't you think you could get me something to read?" The porter said, "Oh, certainly, the old man's got dead loads of books," and he was gone before I could tell him what sort of literature I would rather have. And yet his countenance expressed the utmost confidence in his ability to execute the commission with credit to himself. The old man made a descent on him. "What are you going to do with that pile of books?" 15 wants 'em, sir." 15, is it? He'll want a warming pan, next he'll want a nurse. Take him everything there is in the house, take him the barkeeper, take him the baggage wagon, take him a chambermaid. Confound me, I never saw anything like it. What did he say he wants with those books? Wants to read 'em, like enough. It ain't likely he wants to eat 'em, I don't reckon. Wants to read 'em this time of night, the infernal lunatic. Well, he can't have them. But he says he's morally bound to have 'em. He says he'll just go a rarin' and a chargin' through this house and raise more. Well, there's no tellin' what he won't do if he don't get 'em, because he's drunk and crazy and desperate, and nothing'll soothe him down but them cussed books. I had not made any threats, and was not in the condition ascribed to me by the porter. Well, go on, but I will be around when he goes to raring and charging, and the first rare he makes I'll make him rare out of the window. And then the old gentleman went off, growling as before. The genius of that porter was something wonderful. He put an armful of books on the bed and said good night as confidently as if he knew perfectly well that those books were exactly my style of reading matter. And well he might. His selection covered the whole range of legitimate literature. It comprised The Great Consummation by Rev. Dr. Cummings' Theology, Revised Statutes of the State of Missouri Law, The Complete Horse Doctor, Medicine, The Toilers of the Sea by Victor Hugo Romance, the works of William Shakespeare poetry. I shall never cease to admire the tact and the intelligence of that gifted porter. But all the donkeys in Christendom, and most of the Egyptian boys, I think, are at the door. And there is some noise going on, not to put it in stronger language. We are about starting to the illustrious pyramids of Egypt, and the donkeys for the voyage are under inspection. I will go and select one before the choice animals are all taken. Chapter 58. The donkeys were all good, all handsome, all strong and in good condition, all fast and all willing to prove it. They were the best we had found anywhere, and the most recherche. I do not know what recherche is, but that is what these donkeys were anyhow. Some were of a soft mouse color, and the others were white, black, and vari-colored. Some were close-shaven, all over, except that a tuft like a paintbrush was left on the end of the tail. Others were so shaven in fanciful landscape garden patterns as to mark their bodies with curving lines, which were bounded on one side by hair and on the other by the close plush left by the shears. They had all been newly barbered and were exceedingly stylish. Several of the white ones were barred like zebras, with rainbow stripes of blue and red and yellow paint. These were indescribably gorgeous. Dan and Jack selected from this lot because they brought back Italian reminiscences of the old masters. The saddles were the high, stuffy, frog-shaped things we had known in Ephesus and Smyrna. The donkey boys were lively young Egyptian rascals who could follow a donkey and keep him in a canter half a day without tiring. We had plenty of spectators when we mounted, for the hotel was full of English people bound overland to India and officers getting ready for the African campaign against the Abyssinian King Theodorus. We were not a very large party, but as we charged through the streets of the great metropolis, we made noise for 500 and displayed activity and created excitement in proportion. Nobody can steer a donkey, and some collided with camels, dervishes, effendis, asses, beggars, and everything else that offered to the donkeys a reasonable chance for a collision. When we turned into the broad avenue that leads out of the city toward Old Cairo, there was plenty of room. The walls of stately date palms that fenced the gardens and bordered the way threw their shadows down and made the air cool and bracing. We rose to the spirit of the time, and the race became a wild rout, a stampede, a terrific panic. I wish to live to enjoy it again. Somewhere along this route, we had a few startling exhibitions of Oriental simplicity. A girl apparently 13 years of age came along the great thoroughfare, dressed like Eve before the fall. We would have called her 13 at home, but here girls who look 13 are often not more than 9 in reality. Occasionally we saw stark-naked men of superb build, bathing, and making no attempt at concealment. However, an hour's acquaintance with this cheerful custom reconciled the pilgrims to it, and then it ceased to occasion remark. Thus easily do even the most startling novelties grow tame and spiritless to these sight-surfeited wanderers. Arrived at Old Cairo, the camp followers took up the donkeys and tumbled them bodily aboard a small boat with a lateen sail, and we followed and got under way. The deck was closely packed with donkeys and men. The two sailors had to climb over and under and through the wedged mast to work the sails, and the steersman had to crowd 4 or 5 donkeys out of the way when he wished to swing his tiller and put his helm hard down. But what were their troubles to us? We had nothing to do but enjoy the trip, nothing to do but shove the donkeys off our corns and look at the charming scenery of the Nile. On the island at our right was the machine they call the Nilometer, a stone column whose business it is to mark the rise of the river and prophesy whether it will reach only 32 feet and produce a famine, or whether it will properly flood the land at 40 and produce plenty, or whether it will rise to 43 and bring death and destruction to flocks, and crops, but how it does all this they could not explain to us so that we could understand. On the same island is still shown the spot where Pharaoh's daughter found Moses in the bulrushes. Near the spot we sailed from, the Holy Family dwelt when they sojourned in Egypt, till Herod should complete his slaughter of the innocents. The same tree they rested under when they first arrived was there a short time ago, but the Viceroy of Egypt sent it to the Empress Eugenie lately. He was just in time, otherwise our pilgrims would have had it. The Nile at this point is muddy, swift, and turbid, and does not lack a great deal of being as wide as the Mississippi. We scrambled up the steep bank at the shabby town of Gizeh, mounted the donkeys again, and scampered away. For 4 or 5 miles, the route lay along a high embankment which they say is to be the bed of a railway. The Sultan means to build for no other reason than that, when the Empress of the French comes to visit him, she can go to the pyramids in comfort. This is true Oriental hospitality. I am very glad it is our privilege to have donkeys instead of cars. At the distance of a few miles, the pyramids rising above the palms looked very clean-cut, very grand and imposing, and very soft and filmy as well. They swam in a rich haze that took from them all suggestions of unfeeling stone, and made them seem only the airy nothings of a dream structures which might blossom into tiers of vague arches, or ornate colonnades, may be and change again, into all graceful forms of architecture, while we looked, and then melt deliciously away and blend with the tremulous atmosphere. At the end of the levee, we left the mules and went in a sailboat across an arm of the Nile or an overflow, and landed where the sands of the Great Sahara left their embankment, as straight as a wall, along the verge of the alluvial plain of the river. A laborious walk in the flaming sun brought us to the foot of the Great Pyramid of Cheops. It was a fairy vision no longer. It was a corrugated, unsightly mountain of stone. Each of its monstrous sides was a wide stairway which rose upward, step above step, narrowing as it went, till it tapered to a point far aloft in the air. Insect men and women pilgrims from the Quaker City were creeping about its dizzy perches, and one little black swarm were waving postage stamps from the airy summit handkerchiefs, will be understood. Of course we were besieged by a rabble of muscular Egyptians and Arabs who wanted the contract of dragging us to the top all tourists are. Of course you could not hear your own voice for the din that was around you. Of course the sheik said they were the only responsible parties, that all contracts must be made with them, all monies paid over to them, and none exacted from us by any but themselves alone. Of course they contracted that the varlets who dragged us up should not mention bucksheesh once. For such is the usual routine. Of course we contracted with them, paid them, were delivered into the hands of the draggers, dragged up the pyramids, and harried and bedeviled for bucksheesh from the foundation clear to the summit. We paid it too, for we were purposely spread very far apart over the vast side of the pyramid. There was no help near if we called, and the Herculeses who dragged us had a way of asking sweetly and flatteringly for bucksheesh, which was seductive, and of looking fierce and threatening to throw us down the precipice, which was persuasive and convincing. Each step being full as high as a dinner table, there being very, very many of the steps, an Arab having hold of each of our arms and springing upward from step to step and snatching us with them, forcing us to lift our feet as high as our breasts every time, and do it rapidly and keep it up till we were ready to faint. Who shall say it is not lively, exhilarating, lacerating, muscle-straining, bone-wrenching, and perfectly excruciating and exhausting pastime, climbing the pyramids? I beseech the varlets not to twist all my joints asunder. I iterated, reiterated, even swore to them that I did not wish to beat any body to the top. Did all I could to convince them that if I got there the last of all I would feel blessed above men and grateful to them forever. I begged them, prayed them, pleaded with them to let me stop and rest a moment, only one little moment. And they only answered with some more frightful springs, and an unenlisted volunteer behind opened a bombardment of determined boosts with his head, which threatened to batter my whole political economy to wreck and ruin. Twice, for 1 minute, they let me rest while they extorted bucksheesh, and then continued their maniac flight up the pyramid. They wished to beat the other parties. It was nothing to them that I, a stranger, must be sacrificed upon the altar of their unholy ambition. But in the midst of sorrow, joy blooms. Even in this dark hour, I had a sweet consolation. For I knew that except these Mohammedans repented, they would go straight to perdition some day. And they never repent, they never forsake their paganism. This thought calmed me, cheered me, and I sank down, limp and exhausted, upon the summit, but happy, so happy and serene within. On the one hand, a mighty sea of yellow sand stretched away toward the ends of the earth, solemn, silent, shorn of vegetation, its solitude uncheered by any forms of creature life. On the other, the Eden of Egypt was spread below us, a broad green floor, cloven by the sinuous river, dotted with villages, its vast distances measured and marked by the diminishing stature of receding clusters of palms. It lay asleep in an enchanted atmosphere. There was no sound, no motion. Above the date plumes in the middle distance swelled a domed and pinnacled mass, glimmering through a tinted, exquisite mist. Away toward the horizon, a dozen shapely pyramids watched over ruined Memphis. And at our feet, the bland, impassible Sphinx looked out upon the picture from her throne in the sands as placidly and pensively as she had looked upon its like full 50 lagging centuries ago. We suffered torture no pen can describe, from the hungry appeals for bucksheesh that gleamed from Arab eyes and poured incessantly from Arab lips. Why try to call up the traditions of vanished Egyptian grandeur? Why try to fancy Egypt following dead Ramesses to his tomb in the pyramid, or the long multitude of Israel departing over the desert yonder? Why try to think it all? The thing was impossible. One must bring his meditations cut and dried, or else cut and dry them afterward. The traditional Arab proposed, in the traditional way, to run down Cheops, cross the eighth of a mile of sand intervening between it and the tall pyramid of Sephron, ascend to Sephron's summit, and return to us on the top of Cheopsal in 9 minutes by the watch, and the whole service to be rendered for $1. In the first flush of irritation, I said let the Arab and his exploits go to the mischief. But stay. The upper third of Sephron was coated with dressed marble, smooth as glass. A blessed thought entered my brain. He must infallibly break his neck. Close the contract with dispatch, I said, and let him go. He started. We watched. He went bounding down the vast broadside, spring after spring, like an ibex. He grew small and smaller till he became a bobbing pygmy, away down toward the bottom, then disappeared. We turned and peered over the other side. 40 seconds, 80 seconds, 100 happiness. He is dead already, 2 minutes and a quarter, there he goes. Too true, it was too true. He was very small now. Gradually, but surely, he overcame the level ground. He began to spring and climb again. Up, 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 at last he reached the smooth coating now for it. But he clung to it with toes and fingers, like a fly. He crawled this way and that away to the right, slanting upward away to the left, still slanting upward, and stood at last, a black peg on the summit, and waved his pygmy scarf. Then he crept downward to the raw steps again, then picked up his agile heels and flew. We lost him presently. But presently again we saw him under us, mounting with undiminished energy. Shortly he bounded into our midst with a gallant war whoop. Time 8 minutes, 41 seconds. He had won. His bones were intact. It was a failure. I reflected. I said to myself, he is tired and must grow dizzy. I will risk another $1 on him. He started again. Made the trip again. Slipped on the smooth coating, I almost had him. But an infamous crevice saved him. He was with us once more, perfectly sound. Time 8 minutes, 46 seconds. I said to Dan, lend me $1, I can beat this game yet. Worse and worse. He won again. Time 8 minutes, 48 seconds. I was out of all patience now. I was desperate. Money was no longer of any consequence. I said, Sira, I will give you $100 to jump off this pyramid head first. If you do not like the terms, name your bet. I scorn to stand on expenses now. I will stay right here and risk money on you as long as Dan has got a cent. I was in a fair way to win now, for it was a dazzling opportunity for an Arab. He pondered a moment and would have done it, I think, but his mother arrived then and interfered. Her tears moved me. I never can look upon the tears of woman with indifference, and I said I would give her $100 to jump off, too. But it was a failure. The Arabs are too high-priced in Egypt. They put on airs unbecoming to such savages. We descended, hot and out of humor. The dragoman lit candles, and we all entered a hole near the base of the pyramid, attended by a crazy rabble of Arabs who thrust their services upon us uninvited. They dragged us up a long inclined chute and dripped candle grease all over us. This chute was not more than twice as wide and high as a Saratoga trunk, and was walled, roofed, and floored with solid blocks of Egyptian granite as wide as a wardrobe, twice as thick and 3 times as long. We kept on climbing, through the oppressive gloom, till I thought we ought to be nearing the top of the pyramid again, and then came to the Queen's chamber, and shortly to the chamber of the king. These large apartments were tombs. The walls were built of monstrous masses of smoothed granite, neatly joined together. Some of them were nearly as large square as an ordinary parlor. A great stone sarcophagus, like a bathtub, stood in the center of the king's chamber. Around it were gathered a picturesque group of Arab savages and soiled and tattered pilgrims, who held their candles aloft in the gloom while they chattered, and the winking blurs of light shed a dim glory down upon one of the irrepressible memento-seekers who was pecking at the venerable sarcophagus with his sacrilegious hammer. We struggled out to the open air and the bright sunshine, and for the space of 30 minutes received ragged Arabs by couples, dozens, and platoons, and paid them bucksheesh for services they swore and proved by each other that they had rendered, but which we had not been aware of beforehand. As each party was paid, they dropped into the rear of the procession and in due time arrived again with a newly invented delinquent list for liquidation. We lunched in the shade of the pyramid, and in the midst of this encroaching and unwelcome company, and then Dan and Jack and I started away for a walk. A howling swarm of beggars followed us, surrounded us, almost headed us off. A sheik, in flowing white bornus and gaudy headgear, was with them. He wanted more bucksheesh. But we had adopted a new code: it was millions for defense, but not a cent for bucksheesh. I asked him if he could persuade the others to depart if we paid him. He said yes for 10 francs. We accepted the contract and said, "Now persuade your vassals to fall back." He swung his long staff round his head, and 3 Arabs bit the dust. He capered among the mob like a very maniac. His blows fell like hail, and wherever one fell, a subject went down. We had to hurry to the rescue and tell him it was only necessary to damage them a little. He need not kill them. In 2 minutes we were alone with the sheik, and remained so. The persuasive powers of this illiterate savage were remarkable. Each side of the Pyramid of Cheops is about as long as the Capitol at Washington, or the Sultan's new palace on the Bosporus, and is longer than the greatest depth of St. Peter's at Rome, which is to say that each side of Cheops extends 700 and some odd feet. It is about 75 feet higher than the cross on St. Peter's. The first time I ever went down the Mississippi, I thought the highest bluff on the river between St. Louis and New Orleans was near Selma. Missouri was probably the highest mountain in the world. It is 413 feet high. It still looms in my memory with undiminished grandeur. I can still see the trees and bushes growing smaller and smaller as I followed them up its huge slant with my eye, till they became a feathery fringe on the distant summit. This symmetrical pyramid of Cheops, this solid mountain of stone, reared by the patient hands of men, this mighty tomb of a forgotten monarch, dwarfs my cherished mountain. For it is 480 feet high. In still earlier years than those I have been recalling, Holliday's Hill in our town was to me the noblest work of God. It appeared to pierce the skies. It was nearly 300 feet high. In those days I pondered the subject much, but I never could understand why it did not swathe its summit with never-failing clouds and crown its majestic brow with everlasting snows. I had heard that such was the custom of great mountains in other parts of the world. I remembered how I worked with another boy, at odd afternoons stolen from study and paid for with stripes, to undermine and start from its bed an immense boulder that rested upon the edge of that hilltop. I remembered how, one Saturday afternoon, we gave 3 hours of honest effort to the task, and saw at last that our reward was at hand. I remembered how we sat down then and wiped the perspiration away, and waited to let a picnic party get out of the way in the road below, and then we started the boulder. It was splendid. It went crashing down the hillside, tearing up saplings, mowing bushes down like grass, ripping and crushing and smashing everything in its path eternally splintered, and scattered a wood pile at the foot of the hill, and then sprang from the high bank clear over a dray in the road. The Negro glanced up once, and dodged in the next second. It made infinitesimal mincemeat of a frame cooper shop, and the coopers swarmed out like bees. Then we said it was perfectly magnificent, and left, because the coopers were starting up the hill to inquire. Still, that mountain, prodigious as it was nothing to the pyramid of Cheops. I could conjure up no comparison that would convey to my mind a satisfactory comprehension of the magnitude of a pile of monstrous stones that covered 13 acres of ground and stretched upward 480 tiresome feet. And so I gave it up and walked down to the Sphinx. After years of waiting, it was before me at last. The great face was so sad, so earnest, so longing, so patient. There was a dignity not of earth in its mien, and in its countenance a benignity such as never anything human wore. It was stone, but it seemed sentient. If ever image of stone thought, it was thinking. It was looking toward the verge of the landscape, yet looking at nothing but distance and vacancy. It was looking over and beyond everything of the present, and far into the past. It was gazing out over the ocean of time-over lines of century waves, which, further and further receding, closed nearer and nearer together, and blended at last into one unbroken tide, away toward the horizon of remote antiquity. It was thinking of the wars of departed ages, of the empires it had seen created and destroyed, of the nations whose birth it had witnessed, whose progress it had watched, whose annihilation it had noted, of the joy and sorrow, the life and death, the grandeur and decay of 5,000 slow revolving years. It was the type of an attribute of man, of a faculty of his heart and brain. It was memory retrospection wrought into visible, tangible form. All who know what pathos there is in memories of days that are accomplished, and faces that have vanished albeit only a trifling score of years gone by, will have some appreciation of the pathos that dwells in these grave eyes that look so steadfastly back upon the things they knew before history was born, before tradition had being, things that were, and forms that moved. In a vague era, which even poetry and romance scarce know of, and passed one by one away, and left the stony dreamer solitary in the midst of a strange new age and uncomprehended scenes. The Sphinx is grand in its loneliness. It is imposing in its magnitude. It is impressive in the mystery that hangs over its story. And there is that in the overshadowing majesty of this eternal figure of stone, with its accusing memory of the deeds of all ages, which reveals to one something of what he shall feel when he shall stand at last in the awful presence of God. There are some things which, for the credit of America, should be left unsaid, perhaps. But these very things happen sometimes to be the very things which, for the real benefit of Americans, ought to have prominent notice. While we stood looking, a wart, or an excrescence of some kind, appeared on the jaw of the Sphinx. We heard the familiar clink of a hammer, and understood the case at once. One of our well-meaning reptiles, relic hunters, had crawled up there, and was trying to break a specimen from the face of this, the most majestic creation the hand of man has wrought. But the great image contemplated the dead ages as calmly as ever, unconscious of the small insect that was fretting at its jaw. Egyptian granite that has defied the storms and earthquakes of all time has nothing to fear from the tack hammers of ignorant excursionists, highwaymen like this specimen. He failed in his enterprise. We sent a sheik to arrest him if he had the authority, or to warn him, if he had not, that by the laws of Egypt the crime he was attempting to commit was punishable with imprisonment or the bastinado. Then he desisted and went away. The Sphinx, 125 feet long, 60 feet high, and 102 feet around the head, if I remember rightly, carved out of one solid block of stone harder than any iron. The block must have been as large as the Fifth Avenue Hotel before the usual waste. By the necessities of sculpture, of a fourth or a half of the original mass was begun. I only set down these figures and these remarks to suggest the prodigious labor the carving of it so elegantly, so symmetrically, so faultlessly, must have cost. This species of stone is so hard that figures cut in it remain sharp and unmarred after exposure to the weather for 2,000 or 3,000 years. Now did it take 100 years of patient toil to carve the Sphinx? It seems probable. Something interfered, and we did not visit the Red Sea and walk upon the sands of Arabia. I shall not describe the great mosque of Mehemet Ali, whose entire inner walls are built of polished and glistening alabaster. I shall not tell how the little birds have built their nests in the globes of the great chandeliers that hang in the mosque, and how they fill the whole place with their music and are not afraid of anybody because their audacity is pardoned, their rights are respected, and nobody is allowed to interfere with them, even though the mosque be thus doomed to go unlighted. I certainly shall not tell the hackneyed story of the massacre of the Mamelukes, because I am glad the lawless rascals were massacred, and I do not wish to get up any sympathy in their behalf. I shall not tell how that one solitary Mameluke jumped his horse 100 feet down from the battlements of the citadel and escaped, because I do not think much of that I could have done it myself. I shall not tell of Joseph's well which he dug in the solid rock of the citadel hill, and which is still as good as new, nor how the same mules he bought to draw up the water, with an endless chain, are still at it yet, and are getting tired of it, too. I shall not tell about Joseph's granaries which he built to store the grain in, what time the Egyptian brokers were selling short, unwitting that there would be no corn in all the land when it should be time for them to deliver. I shall not tell anything about the strange, strange city of Cairo, because it is only a repetition, a good deal intensified and exaggerated, of the Oriental cities I have already spoken of. I shall not tell of the great caravan which leaves for Mecca every year, for I did not see it. Nor of the fashion the people have of prostrating themselves, and so forming a long human pavement to be ridden over by the chief of the expedition on its return, to the end that their salvation may be thus secured, for I did not see that either. I shall not speak of the railway, for it is like any other railway. I shall only say that the fuel they use for the locomotive is composed of mummies 3,000 years old, purchased by the ton or by the graveyard for that purpose, and that sometimes one hears the profane engineer call out pettishly, 500, and these plebeians, they don't burn worth a cent pass out a king, stated to me for a fact. I only tell it as I got it. I am willing to believe it. I can believe anything. I shall not tell of the groups of mud cones stuck like wasps' nests upon 1,000 mounds above high watermark the length and breadth of Egypt villages of the lower classes. I shall not speak of the boundless sweep of level plain green with luxuriant grain that gladdens the eye as far as it can pierce through the soft, rich atmosphere of Egypt. I shall not speak of the vision of the pyramids seen at a distance of 25 miles, for the picture is too ethereal to be limned by an uninspired pen. I shall not tell of the crowds of dusky women who flocked to the cars when they stopped a moment at a station to sell us a drink of water or a ruddy, juicy pomegranate. I shall not tell of the motley multitudes and wild costumes that graced a fair we found in full blast at another barbarous station. I shall not tell how we feasted on fresh dates and enjoyed the pleasant landscape all through the flying journey, nor how we thundered into Alexandria at last, swarmed out of the cars, rowed aboard the ship, left a comrade behind, who was to return to Europe, thence home, raised the anchor, and turned our bows homeward finally and forever from the long voyage. Nor how, as the mellow sun went down upon the oldest land on earth, Jack and Moult assembled in solemn state in the smoking room and mourned over the lost comrade the whole night long, and would not be comforted. I shall not speak a word of any of these things, or write a line. They shall be as a sealed book. I do not know what a sealed book is, because I never saw one, but a sealed book is the expression to use in this connection, because it is popular. We were glad to have seen the land which was the mother of civilization, which taught Greece her letters, and through Greece Rome, and through Rome the world. The land which could have humanized and civilized the hapless children of Israel, but allowed them to depart out of her borders little better than savages. We were glad to have seen that land which had an enlightened religion with future eternal rewards and punishment in it, while even Israel's religion contained no promise of a hereafter. We were glad to have seen that land which had glass 3,000 years before England had it, and could paint upon it as none of us can paint now. That land which knew, 3,000 years ago, well nigh all of medicine and surgery which science has discovered lately, which had all those curious surgical instruments which science has invented recently, which had in high excellence 1,000 luxuries and necessities of an advanced civilization, which we have gradually contrived and accumulated in modern times, and claimed as things that were new under the sun. That had paper untold centuries before we dreamt of it, and waterfalls before our women thought of them. That had a perfect system of common schools so long before we boasted of our achievements in that direction that it seems forever and forever ago. That so embalmed the dead that flesh was made almost immortal, which we cannot do. That built temples which mock at destroying time and smile grimly upon our lauded little prodigies of architecture. That old land that knew all which we know now, perchance, and more, that walked in the broad highway of civilization in the gray dawn of creation, ages and ages before we were born. That left the impress of exalted, cultivated mind upon the eternal front of the Sphinx, to confound all scoffers who, when all her other proofs had passed away, might seek to persuade the world that imperial Egypt, in the days of her high renown, had groped in darkness. Chapter 59. We were at sea now. For a very long voyage we were to pass through the entire length of the Levant, through the entire length of the Mediterranean proper, also, and then cross the full width of the Atlantica voyage of several weeks. We naturally settled down into a very slow, stay-at-home manner of life, and resolved to be quiet, exemplary people, and roam no more for 20 or 30 days. No more, at least, than from stem to stern of the ship. It was a very comfortable prospect, though, for we were tired and needed a long rest. We were all lazy and satisfied, now as the meager entries in my notebook, that sure index to me of my condition, prove. What a stupid thing a notebook gets to be at sea, anyway. Please observe the style. Sunday services, as usual at 4 bells. Services at night also. No cards. Monday beautiful day, but rained hard. The cattle purchased at Alexandria for beef ought to be shingled, or else fattened. The water stands in deep puddles in the depressions forward of their after shoulders. Also here and there all over their backs. It is well they are not cows, it would soak in and ruin the milk. The poor devil eagle from Syria looks miserable and droopy in the rain, perched on the forward capstan. He appears to have his own opinion of a sea voyage, and if it were put into language and the language solidified, it would probably essentially dam the widest river in the world. Tuesday somewhere in the neighborhood of the island of Malta. Cannot stop there. Cholera. Weather very stormy. Many passengers seasick and invisible. Wednesday weather still very savage. Storm blew 2 land birds to sea, and they came on board. A hawk was blown off also. He circled round and round the ship, wanting to light but afraid of the people. He was so tired, though, that he had to light at last, or perish. He stopped in the foretop repeatedly, and was as often blown away by the wind. At last Harry caught him. Sea full of flying fish. They rise in flocks of 300, and flash along above the tops of the waves, a distance of 200 or 300 feet, then fall and disappear. Thursday anchored off Algiers, Africa. Beautiful city, beautiful green hilly landscape behind it. Stayed half a day and left. Not permitted to land, though we showed a clean bill of health. They were afraid of Egyptian plague and cholera. Friday morning, dominoes. Afternoon, dominoes. Evening, promenading the deck. Afterwards, charades. Saturday morning, dominoes. Afternoon, dominoes. Evening, promenading the decks. Afterwards, dominoes. Sunday morning service, 4 bells. Evening service, 8 bells. Monotony till midnight, whereupon, dominoes. Monday morning, dominoes. Afternoon, dominoes. Evening, promenading the decks. Afterward, charades, and a lecture from Dr. 100. Dominoes. No day tankered off the picturesque city of Cagliari, Sardinia. Stayed till midnight, but not permitted to land by these infamous foreigners. They smell inodorously, they do not wash, they dare not risk cholera. Thursday anchored off the beautiful cathedral city of Malaga, Spain, went ashore in the captain's boat, not ashore either, for they would not let us land. Quarantine. Shipped my newspaper correspondence, which they took with tongs, dipped it in sea water, clipped it full of holes, and then fumigated it with villainous vapors till it smelt like a Spaniard. inquired about chances to run to blockade and visit the Alhambra at Granada. Too risky they might hang a body. Set sail middle of afternoon. And so on, and so on, and so forth for several days. Finally anchored off Gibraltar, which looks familiar and homelike. It reminds me of the journal I opened with the new year, once, when I was a boy and a confiding and a willing prey to those impossible schemes of reform, which well-meaning old maids and grandmothers set for the feet of unwary youths at that season of the year, setting oversized tasks for them, which, necessarily failing, as infallibly weaken the boy's strength of will, diminish his confidence in himself, and injure his chances of success in life. Please accept of an extract. Monday got up, washed, went to bed. Tuesday got up, washed, went to bed. Wednesday got up, washed, went to bed. Thursday got up, washed, went to bed. Friday got up, washed, went to bed. Next Friday got up, washed, went to bed. Friday fortnight got up, washed, went to bed. Following month got up, washed, went to bed. I stopped then, discouraged. Startling events appeared to be too rare, in my career, to render a diary necessary. I still reflect with pride, however, that even at that early age I washed when I got up. That journal finished me. I never have had the nerve to keep one since. My loss of confidence in myself in that line was permanent. The ship had to stay a week or more at Gibraltar to take in coal for the home voyage. It would be very tiresome staying here, and so 4 of us ran the quarantine blockade and spent 7 delightful days in Seville, Cordova, Cadiz, and wandering through the pleasant rural scenery of Andalusia, the garden of old Spain. The experiences of that cheery week were too varied and numerous for a short chapter, and I have not room for a long one. Therefore, I shall leave them all out. Chapter 60. 10 or 11 o'clock found us coming down to breakfast one morning in Cadiz. They told us the ship had been lying at anchor in the harbor 2 or 3 hours. It was time for us to bestir ourselves. The ship could wait only a little while because of the quarantine. We were soon on board, and within the hour the white city and the pleasant shores of Spain sank down behind the waves and passed out of sight. We had seen no land fade from view so regretfully. It had long ago been decided in a noisy public meeting in the main cabin that we could not go to Lisbon, because we must surely be quarantined there. We did everything by mass meeting, in the good old national way, from swapping off one empire for another on the program of the voyage down to complaining of the cookery and the scarcity of napkins. I am reminded now of one of these complaints of the cookery made by a passenger. The coffee had been steadily growing more and more execrable for the space of 3 weeks, till at last it had ceased to be coffee altogether, and had assumed the nature of mere, discolored water, so this person said. He said it was so weak that it was transparent an inch in depth around the edge of the cup. As he approached the table one morning, he saw the transparent edge by means of his extraordinary vision long before he got to his seat. He went back and complained in a high-handed way to Capt. Duncan. He said the coffee was disgraceful. The captain showed his. It seemed tolerably good. The incipient mutineer was more outraged than ever then, at what he denounced as the partiality shown the captain's table over the other tables in the ship. He flourished back and got his cup and set it down triumphantly, and said, "Just try that mixture once, Captain Duncan." He smelt it, tasted, it smiled benignantly, then said, "It is inferior for coffee, but it is pretty fair tea." The humbled mutineer smelt it, tasted it, and returned to his seat. He had made an egregious ass of himself before the whole ship. He did it no more. After that he took things as they came. That was me. The old-fashioned ship life had returned, now that we were no longer in sight of land. For days and days it continued just the same, one day being exactly like another, and, to me, every one of them pleasant. At last we anchored in the open roadstead of Funchal, in the beautiful islands we call the Madeiras. The mountains looked surpassingly lovely, clad as they were in living green, ribbed with lava ridges, flecked with white cottages, riven by deep chasms purple with shade, the great slopes dashed with sunshine and mottled with shadows flung from the drifting squadrons of the sky, and the superb picture fitly crowned by towering peaks whose fronts were swept by the trailing fringes of the clouds. But we could not land. We stayed all day and looked. We abused the man who invented quarantine. We held half a dozen mass meetings and crammed them full of interrupted speeches, motions that fell stillborn amendments that came to naught, and resolutions that died from sheer exhaustion in trying to get before the House. At night we set sail. We averaged 4 mass meetings a week for the voyage. We seemed always in labor in this way, and yet so often fallaciously that whenever at long intervals we were safely delivered of a resolution, it was cause for public rejoicing, and we hoisted the flag and fired a salute. Days passed and nights, and then the beautiful Bermudas rose out of the sea. We entered the tortuous channel, steamed hither and thither among the bright summer islands, and rested at last under the flag of England and were welcome. We were not a nightmare here, where were civilization and intelligence in place of Spanish and Italian superstition, dirt and dread of cholera. A few days among the breezy groves, the flower gardens, the coral caves, and the lovely vistas of blue water that went curving in and out, disappearing and anon again appearing through jungle walls of brilliant foliage, restored the energies dulled by long drowsing on the ocean, and fitted us for our final cruise-hour little run of 1,000 miles to New York, America home. We bade goodbye to our friends the Bermudians. As our program hath it, the majority of those we were most intimate with were Negroes and courted the great deep again. I said the majority. We knew more Negroes than white people, because we had a deal of washing to be done, but we made some most excellent friends among the whites, whom it will be a pleasant duty to hold long in grateful remembrance. We sailed, and from that hour all idling ceased. Such another system of overhauling, general littering of cabins, and packing of trunks we had not seen since we let go the anchor in the harbor of Beirut. Everybody was busy. Lists of all purchases had to be made out, and values attached, to facilitate matters at the custom house. Purchases bought by bulk in partnership had to be equitably divided, outstanding debts canceled, accounts compared, and trunks, boxes, and packages labeled. All day long the bustle and confusion continued. And now came our first accident. A passenger was running through a gangway, between decks, one stormy night, when he caught his foot in the iron staple of a door that had been heedlessly left off a hatchway, and the bones of his leg broke at the ankle. It was our first serious misfortune. We had traveled much more than 20,000 miles, by land and sea in many trying climates, without a single hurt, without a serious case of sickness, and without a death among 65 passengers. Our good fortune had been wonderful. A sailor had jumped overboard at Constantinople one night and was seen no more, but it was suspected that his object was to desert, and there was a slim chance, at least, that he reached the shore. But the passenger list was complete. There was no name missing from the register. At last, one pleasant morning, we steamed up the harbor of New York, all on deck, all dressed in Christian garb by special order. For there was a latent disposition in some quarters to come out as Turks, and, amid a waving of handkerchiefs from welcoming friends, the glad pilgrims noted the shiver of the decks that told that ship and pier had joined hands again, and the long, strange cruise was over. Amen. Chapter 61. In this place I will print an article which I wrote for the New York Herald the night we arrived. I do it partly because my contract with my publishers makes it compulsory, partly because it is a proper, tolerably accurate, and exhaustive summing up of the cruise of the ship and the performances of the pilgrims in foreign lands, and partly because some of the passengers have abused me for writing it, and I wish the public to see how thankless a task it is to put oneself to trouble to glorify unappreciative people. I was charged with rushing into print with these compliments. I did not rush. I had written newsletters to the Herald sometimes, but yet when I visited the office that day, I did not say anything about writing a valedictory. I did go to the Tribune office to see if such an article was wanted, because I belonged on the regular staff of that paper, and it was simply a duty to do it. The managing editor was absent, and so I thought no more about it. At night, when the Herald's request came for an article, I did not rush. In fact, I demurred for a while, because I did not feel like writing compliments then, and therefore was afraid to speak of the cruise lest I might be betrayed into using other than complimentary language. However, I reflected that it would be a just and righteous thing to go down and write a kind word for the Hajis are people who have made the pilgrimage because parties not interested could not do it so feelingly as I, a fellow Haji, and so I penned the valedictory. I have read it and read it again, and if there is a sentence in it that is not fulsomely complimentary to captain, ship, and passengers, I cannot find it. If it is not a chapter that any company might be proud to have a body write about them, my judgment is fit for nothing. With these remarks, confidently submit it to the unprejudiced judgment of the reader. Return of the Holy Land, excursionists the story of the cruise. To the editor of the Herald. The steamer Quaker City has accomplished at last her extraordinary voyage and returned to her old pier at the foot of Wall Street. The expedition was a success in some respects, in some it was not. Originally it was advertised as a pleasure excursion. Well, perhaps it was a pleasure excursion, but certainly it did not look like one. Certainly it did not act like one. Anybody's and everybody's notion of a pleasure excursion is that the parties to it will of a necessity be young and giddy and somewhat boisterous. They will dance a good deal, sing a good deal, make love, but sermonize very little. Anybody's and everybody's notion of a well-conducted funeral is that there must be a hearse and a corpse, and chief mourners and mourners by courtesy, many old people, much solemnity, no levity, and a prayer and a sermon withal. 3/4 of the Quaker City's passengers were between 40 and 70 years of age. There was a picnic crowd for you. It may be supposed that the other fourth was composed of young girls. But it was not. It was chiefly composed of rusty old bachelors and a child of 6 years. Let us average the ages of the Quaker City's pilgrims and set the figure down as 50 years. Is any man insane enough to imagine that this picnic of patriarchs sang, made love, danced, laughed, told anecdotes, dealt in ungodly levity? In my experience, they sinned little in these matters. No doubt it was presumed here at home that these frolicsome veterans laughed and sang and romped all day, and day after day, and kept up a noisy excitement from one end of the ship to the other, and that they played blind man's buff or danced quadrilles and waltzes on moonlight evenings on the quarterdeck, and that at odd moments of unoccupied time they jotted a laconic item or two in the journals they opened on such an elaborate plan when they left home, and then scurried off to their whist and euchre labors under the cabin lamps. If these things were presumed, the presumption was at fault. The venerable excursionists were not gay and frisky. They played no blind man's buff, they dealt not in whist, they shirked not the irksome journal for a lass. Most of them were even writing books. They never romped, they talked but little, they never sang, save in the nightly prayer meeting. The pleasure ship was a synagogue, and the pleasure trip was a funeral excursion without a corpse. There is nothing exhilarating about a funeral excursion without a corpse. A free, hearty laugh was a sound that was not heard oftener than once in 7 days about those decks or in those cabins, and when it was heard, it met with precious little sympathy. The excursionists danced on 3 separate evenings long ago. It seems an age. Quadrilles of a single set, made up of 3 ladies and 5 gentlemen, the latter with handkerchiefs around their arms to signify their sex, who timed their feet to the solemn wheezing of a melodeon, but even this melancholy orgy was voted to be sinful, and dancing was discontinued. The pilgrims played dominoes when too much Josephus or Robinson's Holy Land researches, or book writing, made recreation necessary for dominoes, is about as mild and sinless a game as any in the world, perhaps excepting always the ineffably insipid diversion they call croquet, which is a game where you don't pocket any balls and don't carom on anything of any consequence, and when you are done nobody has to pay, and there are no refreshments to saw off, and, consequently, there isn't any satisfaction whatever about it. They played dominoes till they were rested, and then they blackguarded each other privately till prayer time. When they were not seasick, they were uncommonly prompt when the dinner gong sounded. Such was our daily life on board the ship Solemnity: decorum, dinner, dominoes, devotions, slander. It was not lively enough for a pleasure trip, but if we had only had a corpse, it would have made a noble funeral excursion. It is all over now. But when I look back, the idea of these venerable fossils skipping forth on a 6 months picnic seems exquisitely refreshing. The advertised title of the expedition, the Grand Holy Land Pleasure Excursion, was a misnomer. The Grand Holy Land Funeral Procession would have been better, much better. Wherever we went, in Europe, Asia, or Africa, we made a sensation, and I suppose I may add, created a famine. None of us had ever been anywhere before. We all hailed from the interior. Travel was a wild novelty to us, and we conducted ourselves in accordance with the natural instincts that were in us and trammeled ourselves with no ceremonies, no conventionalities. We always took care to make it understood that we were Americans. When we found that a good many foreigners had hardly ever heard of America, and that a good many more knew it only as a barbarous province away off somewhere that had lately been at war with somebody, we pitied the ignorance of the old world, but abated no jot of our importance. Many and many a simple community in the Eastern Hemisphere will remember for years the incursion of the strange horde in the year of our Lord 1867 that called themselves Americans, and seemed to imagine in some unaccountable way that they had a right to be proud of it. We generally created a famine, partly because the coffee on the Quaker City was unendurable, and sometimes the more substantial fare was not strictly first class, and partly because one naturally tires of sitting long at the same board and eating from the same dishes. The people of those foreign countries are very, very ignorant. They looked curiously at the costumes we had brought from the wilds of America. They observed that we talked loudly at table sometimes. They noticed that we looked out for expenses and got what we conveniently could out of a franc, and wondered where in the mischief we came from. In Paris, they just simply opened their eyes and stared when we spoke to them in French. We never did succeed in making those idiots understand their own language. One of our passengers said to a shopkeeper, in reference to a proposed return to buy a pair of gloves, "Allons rester tranquillement be vie cum monde." And would you believe it, that shopkeeper, a born Frenchman, had to ask what it was that had been said. Sometimes it seems to me, somehow, that there must be a difference between Parisian French and Quaker City French. The people stared at us everywhere, and we stared at them. We generally made them feel rather small, too, before we got done with them, because we bore down on them with America's greatness until we crushed them. And yet we took kindly to the manners and customs, and especially to the fashions of the various people we visited. When we left the Azores, we wore awful capotes and used fine-tooth combs successfully. When we came back from Tangier in Africa, we were topped with fezzes of the bloodiest hue, hung with tassels like an Indian scalp lock. In France and Spain, we attracted some attention in these costumes. In Italy, they naturally took us for distempered Garibaldians, and set a gunboat to look for anything significant in our changes of uniform. We made Rome howl. We could have made any place howl when we had all our clothes on. We got no fresh raiment in Greece. They had but little there of any kind. But at Constantinople, how we turned out. Turbans, cimeters, fezzes, horse pistols, tunics, sashes, baggy trousers, yellow slippers. Oh, we were gorgeous. The illustrious dogs of Constantinople barked their under jaws off, and even then failed to do us justice. They are all dead by this time. They could not go through such a run of business as we gave them and survive. And then we went to see the Emperor of Russia. We just called on him as comfortably as if we had known him a century or so. And when we had finished our visit, we variegated ourselves with selections from Russian costumes and sailed away again more picturesque than ever. In Smyrna, we picked up camel's hair shawls and other dressy things from Persia. But in Palestine our splendid career ended. They didn't wear any clothes there to speak of. We were satisfied and stopped. We made no experiments. We did not try their costume. But we astonished the natives of that country. We astonished them with such eccentricities of dress as we could muster. We prowled through the Holy Land, from Caesarea Philippi to Jerusalem and the Dead Sea, a weird procession of pilgrims, gotten up regardless of expense, solemn, gorgeous, green-spectacled, drowsing under blue umbrellas, and astride of a sorrier lot of horses, camels and asses than those that came out of Noah's Ark, after 11 months of seasickness and short rations. If ever those children of Israel in Palestine forget when Gideon's band went through there from America, they ought to be cursed once more and finished. It was the rarest spectacle that ever astounded mortal eyes, perhaps. Well, we were at home in Palestine. It was easy to see that that was the grand feature of the expedition. We had cared nothing much about Europe. We galloped through the Louvre, the Pitti, the Uffizi, the Vaticanal, the galleries, and through the pictured and frescoed churches of Venice, Naples, and the cathedrals of Spain. Some of us said that certain of the great works of the old masters were glorious creations of genius. We found it out in the guidebook, though we got hold of the wrong picture sometimes. And the others said they were disgraceful old daubs. We examined modern and ancient statuary with a critical eye in Florence, Rome, or anywhere we found it, and praised it if we saw fit, and if we didn't, we said we preferred the wooden Indians in front of the cigar stores of America. But the Holy Land brought out all our enthusiasm. We fell into raptures by the barren shores of Galilee. We pondered at Tabor and at Nazareth. We exploded into poetry over the questionable loveliness of Esdraelon. We meditated at Jezreel and Samaria over the missionary zeal of Jehu. We fairly rioted among the holy places of Jerusalem. We bathed in Jordan and the Dead Sea, reckless whether our accident insurance policies were extra hazardous or not, and brought away so many jugs of precious water from both places that all the country from Jericho to the mountains of Moab will suffer from drought this year, I think. Yet the pilgrimage part of the excursion was its pet feature. There is no question about that. After dismal, smileless Palestine, beautiful Egypt had few charms for us. We merely glanced at it and were ready for home. They wouldn't let us land at Malta quarantine. They would not let us land in Sardinia, nor at Algiers, Africa, nor at Malaga, Spain, nor Cadiz, nor at the Madeira Islands. So we got offended at all foreigners and turned our backs upon them and came home. I suppose we only stopped at the Bermudas because they were in the program. We did not care anything about any place at all. We wanted to go home. Homesickness was abroad in the ship. It was epidemic. If the authorities of New York had known how badly we had it, they would have quarantined us here. The grand pilgrimage is over. Goodbye to it, and a pleasant memory to it, I am able to say in all kindness. I bear no malice, no ill will toward any individual that was connected with it, either as passenger or officer. Things I did not like at all yesterday I like very well today, now that I am at home, and always hereafter I shall be able to poke fun at the whole gang if the spirit so moves me to do, without ever saying a malicious word. The expedition accomplished all that its program promised that it should accomplish, and we ought all to be satisfied with the management of the matter, certainly. Bye-bye. Mark Twain. I call that complimentary. It is complimentary, and yet I never have received a word of thanks for it from the Hajis. On the contrary, I speak nothing but the serious truth when I say that many of them even took exceptions to the article. In endeavoring to please them, I slaved over that sketch for 2 hours, and had my labor for my pains. I never will do a generous deed again. Conclusion. Nearly 1 year has flown since this notable pilgrimage was ended. And as I sit here at home in San Francisco thinking, I am moved to confess that day by day, the mass of my memories of the excursion have grown more and more pleasant as the disagreeable incidents of travel, which encumbered them, flitted one by one out of my mind. And now, if the Quaker City were weighing her anchor to sail away on the very same cruise again, nothing could gratify me more than to be a passenger. With the same captain, and even the same pilgrims, the same sinners. I was on excellent terms with 8 or 9 of the excursionists, they are my staunch friends yet, and was even on speaking terms with the rest of the 65. I have been at sea quite enough to know that that was a very good average. Because a long sea voyage not only brings out all the mean traits one has and exaggerates them, but raises up others which he never suspected he possessed and even creates new ones. A 12 months' voyage at sea would make of an ordinary man a very miracle of meanness. On the other hand, if a man has good qualities, the spirit seldom moves him to exhibit them on shipboard, at least with any sort of emphasis. Now I am satisfied that our pilgrims are pleasant old people on shore. I am also satisfied that at sea on a second voyage they would be pleasanter, somewhat, than they were on our grand excursion, and so I say without hesitation that I would be glad enough to sail with them again. I could at least enjoy life with my handful of old friends. They could enjoy life with their cliques, as well. Passengers invariably divide up into cliques, on all ships. And I will say here that I would rather travel with an excursion party of Methuselahs than have to be changing ships and comrades constantly, as people do who travel in the ordinary way. Those latter are always grieving over some other ship they have known and lost, and over other comrades whom diverging routes have separated from them. They learn to love a ship just in time to change it for another, and they become attached to a pleasant traveling companion only to lose him. They have that most dismal experience of being in a strange vessel, among strange people who care nothing about them, and of undergoing the customary bullying by strange officers and the insolence of strange servants, repeated over and over again within the compass of every month. They have also that other misery of packing and unpacking trunks, of running the distressing gauntlet of custom houses, of the anxieties attendant upon getting a mass of baggage from point to point on land in safety. I had rasher sail with a whole brigade of patriarchs than suffer so. We never packed our trunks but twice, when we sailed from New York and when we returned to it. Whenever we made a land journey, we estimated how many days we should be gone and what amount of clothing we should need, figured it down to a mathematical nicety, packed a valise or two accordingly, and left the trunks on board. We chose our comrades from among our old, tried friends, and started. We were never dependent upon strangers for companionship. We often had occasion to pity Americans, whom we found traveling drearily among strangers with no friends, to exchange pains and pleasures with. Whenever we were coming back from a land journey, our eyes sought one thing in the distance, first the ship, and, when we saw it riding at anchor with the flag apeak, we felt as a returning wanderer feels when he sees his home. When we stepped on board, our cares vanished, our troubles were at an end, for the ship was home to us. We always had the same familiar old stateroom to go to, and feel safe and at peace and comfortable again. I have no fault to find with the manner in which our excursion was conducted. Its program was faithfully carried out, a thing which surprised me, for great enterprises usually promise vastly more than they perform. It would be well if such an excursion could be gotten up every year, and the system regularly inaugurated. Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime. The excursion is ended and has passed to its place among the things that were. But its varied scenes and its manifold incidents will linger pleasantly in our memories for many a year to come. Always on the wing, as we were, and merely pausing a moment to catch fitful glimpses of the wonders of half a world, we could not hope to receive or retain vivid impressions of all it was our fortune to see. Yet our holiday flight has not been in vain, for, above the confusion of vague recollections, certain of its best prized pictures lift themselves and will still continue perfect in tint and outline after their surroundings shall have faded away. We shall remember something of pleasant France, and something also of Paris, though it flashed upon us a splendid meteor and was gone again, we hardly knew how or where. We shall remember always how we saw majestic Gibraltar glorified with the rich coloring of a Spanish sunset, and swimming in a sea of rainbows. In fancy, we shall see Milan again, and her stately cathedral with its marble wilderness of graceful spires. And Padua Veronicamo, jeweled with stars, and patrician Venice, afloat on her stagnant, flood-silent, desolate, haughty scornful of her humbled stay-trapping herself in memories of her lost fleets, of battle and triumph, and all the pageantry of a glory that is departed. We cannot forget Florence, Naples, nor the foretaste of heaven that is in the delicious atmosphere of Greece, and, surely not Athens, and the broken temples of the Acropolis. Surely not venerable Rome, nor the green plain that compasses her round about, contrasting its brightness with her gray decay, nor the ruined arches that stand apart in the plain, and clothe their looped and windowed raggedness with vines. We shall remember St. Peter's, not as one sees it when he walks the streets of Rome and fancies all her domes are just alike, but as he sees it leagues away, when every meaner edifice has faded out of sight, and that one dome looms superbly up in the flush of sunset, full of dignity and grace, strongly outlined as a mountain. We shall remember Constantinople and the Bosporus, the colossal magnificence of Baalbek, the pyramids of Egypt, the prodigious form, the benignant countenance of the Sphinx Oriental Smyrna, sacred Jerusalem, Damascus, the pearl of the East, the pride of Syria, the fabled Garden of Eden, the home of princes and genii of the Arabian Nights, the oldest metropolis on earth. The one city in all the world that has kept its name and held its place and looked serenely on while the kingdoms and empires of 4,000 years have risen to life, enjoyed their little season of pride and pomp, and then vanished and been forgotten.